All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Maine Rural Healthcare and Education Grand Rounds. My name is Dave McClellan. I'm the program manager for the Merge Collaborative. This Grand Rounds series is made possible with support for the Merge Collaborative and the Building Maine Network, both grant-funded initiatives supporting all of our educators across the state and beyond. Today, we are just thrilled to have Dr. Susan Wehry with us. She's going to be presenting a presentation called CoGenerational Learning. And just a little bit about Dr. Wehry, and forgive me, my eyes go to the side as I officially read this. She is a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist with almost 40 years of experience throughout her multifaceted career as a clinician, educator, policymaker, advocate, and advisor. She has inspired students, professionals, older adults, and family caregivers across the United States and abroad. She now directs the Aging Maine, a geriatrics workforce enhancement project to create a more age-friendly and dementia-inclusive health system. So welcome, Dr. Wehry. It's wonderful to have you. I will turn my camera off and the floor is yours. And you're on mute still.
Thank you. So thanks all for being here. And David, thanks for inviting me. Zoe, same hats off and a shout out to AHEC for making my presence here possible today. I'm really so excited to have joined you for this Maine Rural Health Grand Rounds. I think that there are some housekeeping activities we need to take care of first, and you are familiar with this drill, I am sure. Text the unique activity code in order to get your credit and get the reply text that you're used to getting. That's how you claim your continuing education credits. And if you have any questions about that, I'm sure David can help you. I have nothing to disclose except my biases, which we'll get to in just a moment. But in terms of the usual disclosures for continuing medical education, I have no relevant financial relationships within eligible entities. So you can, download the mobile app if you haven't already done so. And I think that brings us to the end of the sort of necessary CME kinds of slides. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is, as you've heard, co-generational learning. I'm going to unpack a little bit about what that means. Our learning objectives have been changed just slightly from what were in the flyer, in that I've broadened it a bit to say that what I really hope you walk away with are some strategies to foster a successful clinical learning environment. And what I mean by that is one in which tomorrow's physicians get better at becoming just that. And I really hope that you will maybe have one idea that you can walk away with, one actionable idea that would actually lead to a practice improvement in your own practice, and that specifically, if it were related to older adults, that would be an extra gift. So let's get started. What's your gen? If you would please tap in the chat box. And I don't mean gender. I'd like to know what your gen is. If you need some help remembering how we do this, how the experts do this, I've put the birth dates in there. And then I'd like you to just add a little note about how my asking that question landed with you. Did it annoy you, irritate you, amuse you, make you roll your eyes, make you wish you hadn't come today, say, this is going to be interesting? What does thinking about these generational distinctions mean to you? So how
And I'm
do you
going to
feel
note for
about
all the
my...
video watchers out there, we've got boomer, exennial, millennial, baby boomer, millennials, Gen X, lots of diverse things in the chat here.
Thanks so much for reading those off. I'm still trying to get used to sliding back and forth with my screen, David. And it looks like, except for the silent generation, most of us who are likely alive today are represented. So why do I do that? Well, I'll tell you why I ask is because I have some reservations about today's talk. I was telling David before we started that a lot of the emphasis currently in our culture, in finding our way to our boxes and our right labels and our frictionless existence, has at times been kind of annoying to me. And I have resisted, to some extent, the emphasis on it at my own university, the University of New England College of Osteopathic Medicine, where our efforts to hone our education around the imagined needs of groups of students coming in as if they are all alike was kind of grating from time to time. But I'm happy to say that in preparation for this presentation, I learned so much and I unpacked this with really kind of a different attitude that I want to share with you today. That picture up there, by the way, is my representation of the Alpha generation. My niece, who is a year old, last October, my great niece, who is a year old, belongs to what is now, yes, Gen Alpha, as we start recycling the alphabet. Now, we don't have any silent gens on here, but I bet in your practice you might have even some centarians from the so-called greatest generation. And while I think that these categories are sort of artificial, I do think that demographers and people who look at characteristics, the sort of um, socio-cultural milieu in which we all find ourselves, have made some observations which are worth our taking a look at because we do live in a multi-generational society. We are alive today with alphas to the silence, and that's a lot of generational opportunity for learning from one another. The other part of the why do this is because there is within the popular press, as well as within the professional literature, a new emphasis on the new gen, the Gen Zs, and their challenges in medical education. Sort of like I was just getting used to what millennials need, and here come the Zs. And so I think what you're going to hear in this presentation are generalizations, all of which should be taken with kind of curiosity, appreciative inquiry, a recognition that they are just generalizations, but there may be something in them. Because Gen Z did grow up, is growing up in a world that is remarkably different from the world that I grew up in, and is growing up at a time that is the most divisive of any time in my lived experience. So these are interesting times, and they have already had 25, 28 years of an interesting existence. So I would ask that our spirit be that we embrace these differences, that we look at them as opportunities to learn from each other, to in fact expand our own appreciation of the world by seeing how it looks differently, how it looks different to different generations, that we recognize that we have unique lived experience that leaves us with unique attributes, and that we're always looking for our shared values, particularly as physicians, and as part of a long and noble tradition of a cadre of professionals who have always held that identity very dear. I think these attitudes, these habits of mine, actually will help our students as well optimize their lifelong learning. In the pedagogical literature, there is a sort of a debate going on right now as to whether or not um, defining and understanding these intergenerational differences should or should not be included in every medical curriculum. For those who support actually having a module on medical education, they cite the fact that there are different perspectives, preferences, expectations, and that these impact not only the interactions between educators and students, but also impact interactions between physicians and patients. And so they would argue that the differences are real and that we need to pay attention to them. And I would add to this that they are real, they aren't as tidy as we might think, and that what is equally important is that we are acutely aware of the assumptions that we make. Because I think that it is the assumptions as well as the characteristics themselves that create the potential for these intergenerational challenges. And if we're simply aware of them and paying attention and have curiosity about them, then I really do think that will enhance communication and foster inclusivity and collaboration and make for better doctors. On the other hand, because these descriptors are not particularly accurate, they may not be particularly useful. And the risks, of course, is that we run into stereotyping, divisiveness, discrimination. It reinforces certain of our implicit biases. And quite frankly, it really risks falling into the trap of confirmation bias and recency effect. So that the last millennial that you met or the last Zer that you met, who was like the typical description, becomes then your reference point, a lens through which everyone is viewed. Also, because a lot of these biases are not always flattering, we run the risk of the what I would call the negative Pygmalion effect, which is having very low expectations about work ethic, about performance, about maturity, actually makes low performance, immaturity more likely. And that's what we mean by the Pygmalion effect. Because I think this is an area in which there continues to be sometimes rigorous discussion, sometimes robust debate, sometimes just people getting more tightly into their corners. Fewer than 50% of medical schools have actually incorporated this into their curriculum. People are talking about it, but adding a specific module around intergenerational definitions or differences rather is not the norm. So we're going to zero in on Z's as a way of sort of unpacking this a little bit further. And here are the common descriptors that I'm sure you've heard. These are the ones that I read, the ones that I found in the literature. And I should tell you that this is literature that was aided, my search was aided by Perplexity, which is my preferred AI model. And then a cross-reference check of those that looked like maybe questionable. I didn't have any hallucinations in my Perplexity AI assistant, but I did have some references that were stronger than others. And so these are the ones that that I thought had a little bit more merit in terms of the descriptors of Gen Z students. I think what the general agreement is and what has people a little bit worried is that this does seem to be a generation of students who have been slower to develop life skills and are emotionally a little less stable. Mental health disorders, at least looking at the numbers, are definitely more common among the Gen Z generation, things like depression and anxiety and ADHD. On the other hand, substance abuse is down. Now, some people say, well, that's because they never go out. They're not with people. They're not going out to drink. And I don't know if that's true or not. Teen pregnancy is also down. I don't know what it means. Just like I don't know what those mental health disorder numbers mean. What I know is that the data is showing us that this generation, writ large, is different in some ways. If you talk to Gen Zers, and um, people have done this who are studying this, they will report more loneliness and greater feelings of alienation than their millennial counterparts. And they really do have a lot of challenge in managing their interpersonal conflict. Now, I'll tell you what I have found to be the most consistent in my own interactions, both with students and the members of my team in my geriatrics workforce grant, who are members of the Gen Z generation. They like things fast. They like quick experiences. They like rapid success. And they don't actually mind making mistakes because mistakes get fixed so quickly. And I'll give you just a really kind of mundane example of this. We will be in a team meeting. I'll ask a question about something that none of us know the answer to. One of my Gen Z team members will be looking it up while I'm continuing to talk. And we get to the end of our team meeting, and I might say, could somebody look that up? And this team member will say, oh, I already did. I've already emailed you the answer, the thing that we wanted to know. And the emphasis is on how quickly it was done, not how thoroughly, or how much more interested I was in the conversation than the answer. And so it's really interesting. What is positively reinforcing is how fast things can be done, not how accurately. Another one of our team members was the fastest worker I have ever had, and made a lot of mistakes. And I would point that out. And she'd say, "Oh, that's no problem," and would fix it before we'd have time to talk about it. This is a characteristic that I find is really pretty usual. Gen Zs are really good problem solvers, maybe because of that quickness of wanting an answer, being very focused on the end, not the means, sort of getting there, not how we get there, but getting there. They are really oriented towards being successful. I find that they're strongly motivated. They want to be helpful. They're sensitive to human problems. They're digitally savvy. They're very proficient in using digital tools. And this makes for a very great contribution to the healthcare team in our multi-generational settings. So I'd be curious to hear, what's been your experience with this generation of students that we're calling Gen Z? Why don't we come off camera for a moment and I will stop sharing for a moment. Or if you prefer to put something in the chat, I will read that as well.
I'll just
What's
quickly
been
say, my kids are the youngest of the Gen Zs, and you described them perfectly. I
interesting?
appreciate you saying we don't have confirmation bias, and there's of course the data is squishy here. It's all about perception, but the speed at which they jump into AI and get an answer it will just spin your head around. And I'm
It
talking about my
is.
daughter's 15, so she's a high schooler, not medical school, not the professionals that we're talking about, but it is extraordinarily accurate what you just described.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking at some answers from my first question about uh, it doesn't look like we have any zeros on here. A degree, describe somebody's daughter perfectly. No reaction actually to being asked the question or answering the question one way or another. And it is interesting. I am fortunate to have, like I said, relationships, familial, intrafamilial relationships that until 2 years ago, when my mom died at 98, I included a member of the greatest generation as well. And I do find that at the earlier part of being part of that generation, adolescents in particular, I find that those characteristics are quite notable. Well, I'm not sure if for the rest of you, the question doesn't interest you. If you've stopped away for a moment, um, any of those options or either of those options are fine with me. But why don't I go on? And if something occurs to you that you would like to add on this topic of your experience with Gen Zs and co-generational learning, please do put them in the chat. So Before I talk to you about this notion of co-generational learning, I'm going to start with an example of it. I was talking to my team about preparing this presentation, and I was saying that um, there are ways that people share information on social media. There are ways of being in the world that are not my ways of being in the world. I'm not on social media. I do my obligatory connection on LinkedIn in case I'm ever looking for a job, but I don't really participate in the world that way. And so one of my team members uh, shared um, a bunch of TikToks. And she said, "Oh, you should see the great TikToks that talk about this precisely, that talk about how you never want to go to the hospital in July. And because that's when the new interns and residents are there." And so she sent a lot, and some of them were very funny, but some of them were kind of mean-spirited from my point of view. And by the way, if you spend any time on TikTok, you'll discover that that's a thing, that on TikTok, right at the top, there's a POV for certain kinds of TikTok tropes. So this one, however, was so lovely after listening to a lot of kind of mean-spirited TikToks or watching several, and I thought I would share it with you. So we tried this before. I think it's going to work, and I hope it works for the video recording as well. Here we go. Let me just stop this guy 1 minute while I get him into full screen. There we go.
With Gen Z. I'm a
We
doctor
don't
of
have
internal
them just
medicine and
yet.
pediatrics, and I have
We're
the
still looking
opportunity
at
to be a teaching
presentation.
You're still looking at the presentation. Thank you so much. I will find a I will stop sharing this. And there he is.
Yep, there you go. Perfect.
Great. Thank you very much.
I love working with Gen Z. I'm a doctor of internal medicine and pediatrics, and I have the opportunity to be a teaching hospitalist where I get to work with the resident physicians. And I have to say, I love Gen Z. Let me explain. Number one, the respect. Every single day they call me Dr. Martin, and every single day I say, look, call me Tommy. You do not have to call me Dr. Martin, but they still call me Dr. Martin. Number two would be how they talk. So I show up to work today, and one of my incredible residents say, "Oh, Dr. Martin, I love your shoes. It's giving gender reveal." And I was like, "Wait, what?" And they say, "Your shoes, it's giving gender reveal." Let me show you what I'm wearing and it'll make sense. Definitely giving gender reveal. Another example would be on rounds. We came up with an incredible, innovative idea of something that we are going to create. It's an app. I can't tell you because I don't want you to steal it. But as we created, the resident that I was working with just said TM. And to me, I was like, why did they just say my initials? Tommy Martin. So I asked him, like, what was that? And they go, "Oh, TM." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's my initials." And they say, "No, I just trademarked our idea." Literally so funny. Literally, it's been incredible. And outside of that, I will say extremely sweet, caring, and hardworking. To all the Gen Z doctors out there, thank you for making healthcare pretty awesome.
Now, I have to say, I kind of don't get it. Or let me put it this way. I don't think I quite share his amusement by the whole TM communication bit. But I find his affection quite engaging, quite warm, and quite refreshing. He's got 1 million followers. He does a lot of empathic modeling on TikTok. And when we get to resources, you'll see that I've put some on there for you that you may or may not want to share with your medical students. I offered to show you that there is another way in which our students and then ultimately our interns and residents are going to be communicating with one another. I also show it to you to share with you what I find problematic about this millennial, and that is how fast he talks. I'm an older adult. I watch a lot of TikTok now. I listen to a lot of webinars on 1.5 speed, and I tend to like things a little faster. I can almost not keep up with younger health professionals who are communicating information. And it almost seems that their attachment to speed becomes a way, perhaps, of creating distance, or perhaps simply unawareness. And so my ask oftentimes with medical students and with residents and attendings with respect to how they engage with older adults, and if you have one takeaway to share with them, I would ask that it be that one. Just slow down a little bit. Not everyone is addicted to speed. Not everybody is addicted to instant gratification. And I say that quite frankly, kind of non-judgmentally. I get it. Adrenaline's fun. And yet, when you're trying to really communicate information that you want to make sure the other person receives and is able to use, speed works less well. So I want to take a pause here and just invite reflection. This is not to have you put anything into the chat or to come off camera, but I really want you to just think about, whom do you prefer to work with? What do you like to have on your team? Do you prefer to work with men or women? Do you have a generational preference? If not, that's okay too. If you don't even pay attention to generation, that's okay too. But I would venture to say that whether you do so consciously or not, that we all carry with us certain implicit biases just by virtue of growing up in this culture. I became aware, I came to Maine 8 years ago to join the faculty at the University of New England, and I became aware of how things had changed and how hard it was for me to change with them. I liked students who were like me. I liked students who wanted to work hard. I liked students who wanted to put patients first. I liked students who were curious and kind and motivated by being a physician. That was really, really kind of unconsciously important to me. I didn't care as much how smart they were, so long as they were really curious about learning. But what I encountered were students who were proud of what they called their work-life balance, and they looked critically at what they saw as overwork. I didn't see any imbalance at all because in a lot of ways, my work was my life. My life was, it was like a part of it. It didn't have this kind of separate boundary between what I was doing at work. In other words, it's like who I am, not what I do. But I think for many of the students, and this is where I first became aware of it with millennials, that this is a job. It's less of an identity and more part of being in a workplace. And that was hard for me to get used to. So I didn't care men, women, I didn't care generations. I just cared curious and kind. And it was important for me to understand that because, of course, I was responsible for training all students. I also have been very aware of ageist attitudes in both directions. The World Health Organization it's kind of started this big campaign. It's a big campaign in Maine right now, this sort of anti-ageism, but it tends to get concentrated on stopping ageist attitudes towards older people. In Europe, ageist attitudes towards younger people are actually a bigger problem, according to the World Health Organization. So I think I have to say in my experience that I find that people are as critical of the young, as we say, they are of the old. So really my takeaway here is just be aware. Be aware that nonverbal communication speaks volumes, the rolled eyes, the tilt of the head, the sort of knowing look to others in the room when you are talking to either a younger person or an older person. Just be aware, because we know about expectations that they really impact how we experience the world around us. And this little uh, picture is to remind me of the original taste test some of you may be familiar with, that if you tell someone that something that they are about to drink that is bitter is not very bitter, and if you sort of line them up and tell them this one is really bitter and this one is not so bitter, they will experience the same extreme bitterness in different ways. And that has to do with the way our frontal lobes work, but that's for another day. So I do want to make sure that we have time for some Q&A. So I'm going to go a little bit more quickly here, as I see that we are already at 12:30 and I didn't expect to be here so fast. Here's the language I've been using today. Intergenerational learning really just refers to the fact that people do exchange knowledge across all ages. And this, in fact, is what we have always been doing. This is the traditional preceptor model, the attending model, the chief resident, the intern. It's very hierarchical in its design, but there is a definite passing on of and knowledge exchange that has been a little bit more unidirectional, I think, in historically, and now is becoming a little bit more bidirectional. And an example in the community is really just when older adults read to pre-K kids, hang out with them. It's a very popular volunteer kind of activity for older and younger generations to get together. What I really love is shared learning, shared creation. And we had an example of that this year of when we were putting together tech tips for people who are living with dementia. So we got some people living with dementia to participate in the creation of these tech tips. And the product that we came up with was so much better. Generally, I think people in my generation, or by which I simply mean in this instance, those of us with a lot of experience, but who now want the input of others, tend to produce something and then ask people what they think of it, or say, could I get some input on this after we've done it? In cogeneration, you really start with from the beginning. We need to come up with X. Let's make it together. And if you'd like to look at our tech tips, I've put it there. And the notion of reverse mentoring has been around for a long time, very popular in industry. Jack Welch, CEO at GE, is the one who's always touted as the sort of first guy who figured this out, who in the 90s got his younger employees to teach his senior executives about the internet to see what the business opportunities were. The next few slides contain some of the characteristics of learners that I gleaned from the literature, and I include them really for the sake of completeness. And I'm going to highlight just a couple of things. I'm not going to read the whole slide. Basically, there is I think, a really healthy pivot away from the language of creating safe spaces to creating brave spaces. And the notion here is that students are actually encouraged to learn outside their comfort zone, that preceptors are actually encouraged to try to support being uncomfortable, model courage, open, civil, courteous disagreement, as opposed to, well, I guess we'll agree to disagree, which is so passive and so withdrawing from trying to get at the hard issues of today. And I think if we're going to really come together and take advantage of different generational viewpoints, lived experiences, perceptions, that we need to find a way to be brave together, not safe together. And so just an idea that I'm going to start playing with myself as well. This is a generation grew up with ubiquitous technology. Their social development has taken a little bit of a hit. That means simply that they have fewer face-to-face interactions, even though they're the most socially connected generation that we've had. And what is really helpful in that regard for your Gen Z medical students is to make sure that you support their life skills development, not by condescending to them, not by being patronizing, not by saying, oh, you lack social skills, but rather simply saying, here's how the rest of us got it. The expectations need to be really clear. When you set a deadline, make it a hard deadline. This is a generation where people may not have ever had a job. They show up late because they're not used to having to show up on time. Rather than get angry, make it very clear from day one what you expect and what you will hold them to. It's also a generation that's used to kind of bite-sized knowledge. And so one of the things that you want to do is kind of segment the assignment so that each builds on the previous and that they have rapid successes and frequent feedback. These are some things that will be helpful, not only in their professional, but also in their social development. This generation is so lucky they have the world as their learning environment. They like it flexible, they like it virtual. And I think that we all need to broaden the way we think about learning because it's classroom, it's simulation, it's bedside, it's all of it. It is not one or the other, or one or the other is better or worse. It's that every way that we teach has both its content and its meta message. So when we're working in teams and we're working on collaboration, and this generation tends to be more competitive, then set up two teams. Just like in sports, they collaborate with one another and compete across teams. This is so much more helpful than trying to convince people that healthcare is a team sport when they don't see a lot of evidence of it. But having them experience the value of being in a team in a competitive way might be one way to go. Here's some other just little tips about things that that you want to pay attention to. And I would say in this world of AI, what you really want to develop are your source credibility skills and then pass them on to others. I have a little 3-minute video from GSA that I would really like you to watch. I won't take the 3 minutes here to do it in case we want to have some Q&A, but it summarizes this whole long document. And quite frankly, if you could get all of your students to just watch this tips from the Gerontologic Society of America, they will learn the key the key ways to make communication with an older adult more effective. So here are some short form videos and a suggestion for you, something that might be actionable. Many rotations require that students do a presentation at the end. I have sat through many PowerPoint presentations by students. It doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for the rest of the team. But this new short form video could be an alternative platform for presentations. And I put 3 there. We, again, don't have time to see them. You've seen one of them from Dr. Tommy Martin, whom I have started following, who I think has a really nice way of talking about what it means to him to be a physician and how to pass that on to another generation. So what I would do, rather than say, oh, students, I found these great TikToks, or Katie found these great TikToks for me, go watch them, I would say, at the end of this clerkship, I'd like you to make a short form video that tells the next class coming in what are the most important things that they need to focus on during the clerkship. So in sum, embrace it. Keep a check on your own biases and expectations. Support the students' emotional as well as their professional growth. And I would say, you know, that the habit of mind that we should all be cultivating is to be curious and interested and respectful, open-hearted, open-minded, and joyful. Because if we have these habits of mind towards our students, it will help cultivate the same attitudes toward their patients. And for me, that's the most important part of what we do. So thank you for listening to this. And if we still have a little bit of time, David,
Let's
let's
turn those
chat.
cameras back on, folks. Let's take some time to do some Q&A. Susan, that was amazing, and thank you for that. And as we turn the cameras back on, I'll share in the chat. A lot of folks talked about the importance of diverse teams in their workplaces and their enjoyment of working with the mixed generations. Some folks are also following Dr. Martin, Tommy Martin. That's on there too.
Good.
So yeah, a lot of responses there, really supporting the value of intergenerational teams.
Yeah, good. They are funny. I have to admit, I'm not very funny. And it kind of took me a while to get used to like the level of levity. Doug, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk. As you were talking, it got me thinking about a different facet of the challenge. And so a lot of my teaching is at the bedside with teams that are intergenerational, but now we're with multiple generations over the course of the morning rounding. And the dynamic that is fun to see play out is when you have a Gen Z student talking to a fellow boomer patient, or vice versa. And so I wondered if you have any comments on that, like how to bring the intergenerational patient's perspective into the way we should be teaching our future physicians.
I think that is a great question. And I guess for me, my point of view, POV, I might make a TikTok just on POV, but my point of view on this is this. For me, the patient is the most important person in the room every time I'm in the room. Okay. And I suspect that is true for you as well. And one of the ways that I think patients appreciate or how they know that is that when I ask them, and I did this when I was doing bedside teaching, every encounter, I got this group of young doctors with me. What would you like me to teach them today? It started every encounter. What would you like them to know? And then they would have an answer. They would say, I want them to whatever it was. Interestingly, I also carried this into my teaching in nursing homes. And there, 100%, truly, it was that high. When I would ask that of a person sitting in a wheelchair in the hallway, to a person, they would say, don't pass me without saying hello. Smile when you see a patient. Something along those lines. It was really very moving and very consistent. I think in a hospital setting or in a clinic setting, the responses are going to be more varied, but they will tell you how to bring that older person or that different generational person into the conversation. And I often say, and I guess this is where I do use humor a little bit, as an older person and with an older patient and a younger doctor, and it's very clear to me that that younger doctor with very good intentions has simply spoken too fast with too much jargon and too little appreciation of how blank the patient looks. I might say to the patient, and with a tone of voice that has no judgment and no embarrassment, Dr. So-and-so is pretty smart, but I didn't catch all of that. Did you? Or that went a little fast for me, Dr. So-and-so. But here's what I heard you say that you want Mrs. So-and-so to know. So I would then model. I might call, you never know exactly how to teach these things because it depends on the relationship with the patient, with the student, and so forth, whether or not humor is appropriate. But I would always then model for any generation at the bedside with an older person. I might call it out and say, here's what I heard Dr. Wehry say. And then I would repeat it in a way that modeled that one, I was listening to the student. I understood them. And I also understood my audience in a different way. It's funny. I don't see any other hands up, so I'm just going to go on for another second here. I a couple of years ago developed a talk that I did all over the state of Maine called The Aging Brain. And it was about um, um, decreasing your risk of getting dementia and optimizing healthy older brains. And I'm clearly an older person. And I developed this talk, co-generated it with a medical student who was interested in the phenomenon of dementia worry. And she was interested in the phenomenon of dementia worry because her mother had it. This is a young female medical student who had a grandparent, an aunt, two grandparents, an aunt with Alzheimer's disease, and then a mother who was worried about getting Alzheimer's disease. And she said, my mother has zero evidence of Alzheimer's disease, but everything she does, that's her frame of reference. Is there anything that we could do to help combat dementia worry? So she did a lit search and we found out that it's a thing. It's like the fastest growing health anxiety. It's beating out cancer for what middle-aged adults are worried about. Anyway, we wrote this talk, we wrote it together, and we took the show on the road together, and we gave it a lot of times in libraries, church basements, medical centers. I mean, it was really, really fun. And what was interesting at the at these talks is how much people appreciated, and she wasn't able to go every single time we gave it, but how much they appreciated when she was there because they had confidence that there's a new generation that actually cares about them, but how much reassurance they received by my being there because they felt like I got it. And like if I thought at my age you could have a healthy brain, it's like that kind of thing, that it was really helpful. And yet she was such a value add to that conversation. So I don't know, Doug, those are some thoughts that come to mind for me. Thanks for your question.
Thank you for the answer. Those are great thoughts. Appreciate it.
Do we have any other questions today? I want to make sure everyone's voice is heard. Wow. Dr. Wehry, fantastic. Before we go, and I'm very appreciative, Susan, that you mentioned this beginning.
Thanks, Jim.
This was co-sponsored by AHEC, and we have Zoe Hull here from AHEC. They actually have she has a quick request for the group to put into the chat. Zoe, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, yes, thank you. Just some basic demographics that HRSA would love for us to provide. I just stuck it in the chat. Just I mean, I know most of you, but if you could just say your profession, if you work with in a primary care setting, with in a rural area, or with underserved communities, if you could just do a 1, 2, 3, 4 response, it would be really appreciated. But it's great to see everyone. And Dr. Wehry, that was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. And thank you to
Thanks
AHEC
for the opportunity to learn so much myself.
Absolutely. And folks, we are going to be off on this Grand Round series in August, but we are back on September 12th. Our topic is going to be the Master Adaptive Learner Framework. It's being presented by Tara Parody, who's a physical therapist from UNE. She's given us a presentation like this before in the Meredith, let me get this right, Clinical Connect series in the past. It's a great talk. Really, she's a physical therapist, but it is going to be across the healthcare spectrum that benefits from that. So I do hope you can join us on September 12th. Well, with that, thank you, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.